We're going to start in just about a minute. You all ready? Good. All right. Ready? Yes, sir. We're going to start in literally 2 minutes. As soon as they throw something at me and say we're ready, we're ready. Before we start, just a couple housekeeping things. To let you all know that this is being aired live. Twitter views all over the place. A, B, if you want something to say, have something to say, there's an audience mic right here. So feel free to get up there and say what you have to say. It's also being taped, so it's going to be out there on the web, on YouTube, and other places where we're finished, on other people's websites. I go introduce myself, Mark Steiner, so I'm working at Real News and hosting this evening with the JPI, and Real News and JPI. So that's really it, except, there's one really important piece. I don't want to say it while we're live, I'll say it now, is that we're going to go about an hour and a half, including like a 10-minute film, the 10, 11-minute film that we're going to watch at the top. And so we want, if you have something to say, a lot of people have a lot to say, and if you're like me, you talk a lot. So we've asked everybody to try to keep their comments and thoughts, as pithy and as you can, and not give us your whole life story, maybe some of it, not all of it. So, and so that's how we're going to do that this evening. And so We would try to get out of here if we can no later than 7:45. A little bit later, we will, but I'm not going to go too much past that because people have to get home, we have lives, and all the other stuff. They got to get back to DC, Southern Maryland, all the other places we've been able to get to. So as soon as they give me the high sign, I'm going to start officially, and we'll start. Any questions before we start? All right, cool. Oh, if you have these, I think I turned mine off. At least the sound anyway. Try to do that. Start. Roll. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you with us here at the Real News Network. A pleasure to have everybody here in our live audience and across the world of digital world watching us at this moment. This is a production of the Justice Policy Institute talking about the Ungers. We're doing with us here at Real News Network, and we're happy to have everybody here. It's a very critically important subject. I guess everybody in this room knows we don't have to kind of talk about what the Ungers are, but folks who are watching may not know. So let me just say that the Ungers, as they're called, are men and one woman who, over 200 people, who were freed from prison because of an unconstitutional, because it was declared unconstitutional how instructions were given to a jury. And so this has been a huge thing in the state of Maryland, and people were fighting against it. And I remember when when this started happening, and a friend of mine did not get out, another friend of mine did get out, and he'll be on the panel here, who's one of our panelists, Eddie Conway. And I remember sitting in the courtroom when the day it happened and looking out there watching it happen and just looking around the room because I was worried that there were folks who would be there who would be upset about people getting out. And that was very real. But what's happened is in that whole time, only one person out of the entire group was ever reincarcerated, which says a lot. So we're going to talk tonight about that decision, people's lives, what it means to reforming our penal system, what it means to reforming our probation and parole system, and creating a new kind of world, and how that happens. And so we have a number of people here who are under the Ungers decision. They're in the front row, and we want to hear from them. Your microphone is right there in the middle. We want to hear from you as well to talk about this and thinking about this in the context of who we are as a nation, as the most incarcerated nation on the planet Earth, where we have close to 200,000 people who may never get out of jail. They're doing life or 50 years or more, and the majority of those people now are what we call geriatric. I guess that would include me as well, but are people who are in their 60s and 70s. So we're going to really explore a lot of here, and we want to have you participate in all of that and make sure you do that. Before we do that, there was a film made by White Island Youth Media, which is an incredibly wonderful program here in Baltimore, Maryland, of young people learning how to do filmmaking. Tahir is going to come up here from White Island Youth, and he's going to introduce his film on the Ungers, and I'll let him take it from here. Tahir?
Hello, everyone. So White Island Youth Media is an after-school program for middle and high school students where they get the opportunity to learn media creation skills. And that's actually where I started back in 2012, my freshman year of high school. Currently, I'm a senior at Morgan State University. Thank you. And Wide Angle Productions is where we get to use those skills that we learned and apply them to real world applications. And we focus on telling strong stories about the community, issues that affect people. So we were really fortunate on getting the opportunity to help tell the story of the Ungers because it's a really important message that needs to be shared, and it affects not only people in the community but people across the nation. And we learned a lot while filming, and we hope that you guys enjoy the film. And yeah, thank you.
All right, let's play the film.
My name is William Gardner. I work at Second Chance. My job down there is recycling, all the wiring and copper and things like that separated. Everything in this building is about Second Chance, things that we sell to the people that work here. I was incarcerated at the age of 16 in 1968. I came home from prison in 2015. 47 years, 7 months, and 1 day. I had caught a murder charge when I was 16. One of the hardest things that I had to come to terms with was understanding exactly what I'd done. The most important things to me right now is family. I got kids, grandkids, got great-grandkids. I love my family. And if I lost one of my family members to a violent crime, I understand how people feel. All I can try to do is keep going forward and maybe keep someone from following the path that I took.
My name is Stanley Mitchell. Just turned 70 in July. I'm living in Southern Maryland, Waldorf, with my wife and stepdaughter, but she's away at Virginia State. I was charged with felony murder. It was the state's position at trial that I drove the car that was involved in a homicide of an individual. I was found guilty, and I was sentenced to life plus 18 years. I always had comfort that I know that I didn't do it, so I literally thought that the truth would come out, but that didn't happen, so. At the time that I was sentenced, you were eligible for parole after 15 years. If I wasn't in prison, I wasn't gonna do nothing that was gonna keep me there any longer than I had to be, and everything that was available, I took. College, NA, AA, everything that you could possibly get, I took. Based on their guidelines, I felt as though that I earned my freedom.
In 1995, Governor Glendenning ushered in his Life Means Absolute Life policy. He injected politics into the parole process in Maryland, and he's lobbied the legislature to legislate the governor out of the parole process.
My statement in 1995, a life sentence means life, was wrong. It was completely wrong. I made a mistake. The policy must be changed, and must be changed legislatively.
Since we do actually have the penalty of life with the possibility of parole, then I think as a society it is up to us to make sure that we follow with what the legislature and the statute actually says, which means there has to be the ability for the parole.
The older I got, the more stressful it became. I wasn't no spring chicken, I had health issues, and I'm watching a lot of my peers just, one day they're there, and the next day they're deceased, and I'm thinking, am I gonna be one of the lucky ones that just die in my sleep? Or I'm gonna be one of the ones that are dead mentally?
I had been up for parole 17 times. I was considered a model inmate. I was on work release in the 80s. Here it is 2000 and something, and I'm still incarcerated. Everybody's man is treated like they got life without parole. I feel like if it wasn't for the Unger, I'll still be in there. I'll still be in there. They still be telling me be patient, stay out of trouble.
My name is Greg Bernstein. From 2011 to 2014, I was the state's attorney for the city of Baltimore. The court held that defendants who had been sentenced back in the early 70s as a result of an erroneous jury instruction were allowed to obtain a new trial because of that error. We, in effect, became the parole commission. These are difficult cases. They bring up a lot of painful memories, so we had to take that all into account. But ultimately, we felt that given the passage of time and the length of sentence, there wasn't much to be gained from a societal standpoint in trying to prosecute these individuals again.
At the time of their release, their average age was 64. What many people don't realize is nationally, people over 50 have a very low recidivism rate. The Ungers are a special population who's given us a unique real-life case study that individuals who were considered to be the most violent and the worst of the worst can and do change, can successfully come home and be a benefit to the families and communities that they're going back to.
And there's also a cost-benefit analysis here. As these inmates get older, it costs much more to house them, to give them medical care, things of that nature. And you start to think about how can we better spend those resources in a way that rehabilitates them, provides them services on the outside to become more productive members of society.
We have a criminal justice system in place where someone is found guilty and sentenced, and that's appropriate. But the next piece is also important, is to look at who are they now after they've served their time. Think about your own family, think about your own children, and how would you want them treated by the criminal justice system? I think it's important as a society that we do view each individual as an individual and as a human, and not define them by what they did when they were younger.
When you get the opportunity that you can come home, you make the best of it. I wasn't out here 2 weeks and I had a job. I enjoy working down here. A lot of people, different people. You feel welcome in spite of your past. I lost my latter teens, all my 20s, all my 30s, all my 40s, all my 50s, and they was working on my 60s. I wasted a lot of years being incarcerated like that. I like my life to mean a little more than that. I want to be known for the guy who done 40 years, 47 years in prison. I want to be known for someone who ain't made a difference.
With Stanley being home, he has done so much. He's an amazing man, and I'm happy to call him my husband.
I have a short window to finally put whatever talents God gave me to good use. trying to show my appreciation of the fact that I got second chance. I have obligations to not only my wife, but a lot of people have invested time, money, and energy in my success.
They said that we were high risk, danger to society, and we're proving them wrong for every day and every month to go by. They look at them guys in there as being a risk, but actually they can be an asset.
It serves no useful purpose to continue to incarcerate these individuals. And I think that they will bring some to the table. I think there's other individuals that they get out there, hit the ground running, doing what they can to show that you didn't make a mistake by giving them a second opportunity.
So as the panel comes up and take your seats, I just want to say thank you to Wide Angle Youth Media for doing this film. And it just shows you, to me, the power of young people do, and the work they do to change society, that the generation is going to make it happen. And I thank you for your work. I really do. Incredible work. So let me introduce the folks here on the panel that we're going to be talking with. At the far end, we have Mark Schindler. Mark Schindler is the Executive Director of Justice Policy Institute, and no, we're not related. We are here with Salim Karim El Amin, who's with Living Classrooms Assistant Director. Eddie Conway, who I know served 44 plus years in prison, is now Executive Producer here at the Real News Network. And Stanley Mitchell, who served 40 years and worked on this Unger report for JPI and is employed as an advocate for Metro Youth in D.C. and is on the radio at the Roach Brown Jazz and Justice program as well. Gentlemen, good to have you all here.
Thank you.
So I know there's a lot of really serious issues for us to tackle. And by the way, the mic is in the middle, so please feel free to jump up on that mic and have your say. But I'm going to start on a personal question, personal issue first, personal and social first, and then kind of move into the political and policy issues. We're going to have how we address this. I mean, the three of you, all told, 120 years more inside. So I want to talk a little bit about what post-release has meant, and also what you think it means as a lesson about what we have to change. Any of you can start. Kareem, go ahead.
First, I'm really honored to be here, free and at this location as well.
Amen.
Because the movement seems to be real now, because there's a face with what took place with the younger guys, as they're known as, and we get a chance to put a face with it and share the reality of what that experience was all about. Some positives and some negatives. The fact that I'm here, you're here, and this exchange will help enlighten more people, and they can see the reality of what we can get back to, which is humanity. And so, though I was away a long time, 42 years, 6 months, 3 days. I, like the rest of the guys, was just looking for an opportunity. I recall that a few officers used to whisper to me after I'd been there 40 years, of course. They said, "Man, you don't belong in this place." So I read that to mean that he had seen some genuine change. So I took that to heart, continued to strive, and look forward to the day when I would get out. But along the way, I was changing. I guess I was growing up. I took account of my actions. I seen where I could help somebody else with my experiences. And I wasn't doing it just to impress the administration or the people around me, because I had to live like this from now on. And I knew that once I got out, going back to prison was not an option. Sometimes when you look at where you come from and you see how life was, and academically you consider yourself illiterate, and I try to pile on my plate a whole lot of excuses to justify my situation. But the reality is, the truth speaks for itself. If you get the truth and you hold on to it, move forward, it'll benefit you. And I began to get help from other people who seen what my cause was calling. And so once I got the opportunity to be a part of the Unger Project, and it wasn't no doing of my own, because really the petition came from another guy who couldn't even use the Unger petition. He came and presented it to me. He said, "Man, weren't you locked up a long time, before 80, before 70? He said, "You probably could use this." And I'm looking at him, and here's a guy, he'd been locked up a long time, but it didn't affect him. But he's seen a way of helping somebody else. That's another sign for me. I'm always searching for that silver lining, that I get an opportunity to help somebody else, like somebody helped me. So that's my whole objective.
Thank you. Stanley Mitchell?
I appreciate this opportunity to put a human face on. When I hear people say, well, they did 30 years, 40 years, but you actually don't get it until you actually see a person that's done it. While I was incarcerated, I had one goal: to get out by any legal means necessary. It didn't matter whether I did it or not. It doesn't matter whether you did it or not. You're there, so you have to deal with that situation. Every day people ask me, "How you doing?" I say, "I'm alive and free." That's all that's important, that I'm alive and free, and that I'm trying to show the society that I'm not that guy that they said I was.
Eddie Conway.
Well, my experience was a little different. I was in the Black Panther Party when I got locked up, and I went into the prison system as a political prisoner with some level of concern about what was going on in the community and society. So I spent all my 44 years, in fact, to the day I got out, working with young people and some older people, as it turned out, right? And the one thing that I come away from this experience with is there's a tremendous amount of people in the prison system that need to be out in the community. If those brothers and sisters, with the experience they have and the training that they have, was out in the community interacting with young people, it would probably cut the amount of crime in half immediately. And so that's a resource that society is not using, that's there, and it's costing everybody to hold these people in captivity, but it's also damaging the community, because instead of making the community safer, it's actually making the community unsafe by not using that resource and the street creds that most of these guys and women have back in their own community. So I mean, that's what I took. I took away. It's a tremendous loss of resources keeping elder prisoners in jail.
Thank you, Eddie. I mean, this was important to hear first, because I think it's 3 men, 3 different stories, and if you brought all the Ungers up here, there'd be 200 men, 1 woman, with many different stories, and they're all important for us to hear. So I wanted to start that way. But let me jump right into some policy issues here. And one of the big issues here, I think, is that the parole system in Maryland is broken, it's politicized, and it's antiquated. Mark, I'll start with you this time, then we'll all jump in. And let's talk about, I mean, because I remember interviewing Governor Glendening, who was in this film, back in the 90s, and we had this, and it's still up there, we had this heated debate on the radio about why he was doing what he was doing and the injustice of what he was doing. He's finally seen the light, a little late for many men and women. But talk a bit about how they got politicized, what has to be done.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Mark, for having us here, and thanks everyone for being here. For me, it's just like a huge honor to be on the stage with these guys. And I know Etta Meyer was going to be with us today, the one woman, and she's under the weather, so we send our best to her. But I think, as you know, what we understand, and as we did the report, and others who have looked at this issue, and Stanley worked with us on this, what we came to understand quickly is that the Ungers story is emblematic of a larger issue here in Maryland and across the country, right? Where we have a politicized system that is not based, as Eddie was saying, not based on risk and public safety, because if we were just based on that, then these guys would have been out long ago and folks just like them, right? So we have a system that's broken, and we saw Governor Glendening acknowledge how it was a mistake and how it was politicized, but it hasn't been addressed in any significant way since then. So we still have the governor of Maryland, who has veto power over lifers being recommended for parole. Many of these guys were recommended for parole, but governors, both Republican and Democrat, over the years had denied them the opportunity to return to the community. So it's just because of a court ruling, right? If it wasn't for a court ruling, let's be clear, none of these gentlemen would be sitting here, right? And think of the loss that means to the community. Right, so we have a system that's not working. It's not based on research. It's not based on evidence. You have evidence right here, the human stories, their families who are here. That is a testament that the way we're operating doesn't benefit anyone. Right, and it costs us a tremendous amount in terms of the humanity that's lost, in terms of the resources, and as Eddie said, and I think this is one of the most important things that we should emphasize, is that when folks like these guys and others are back in the community, they're contributing and actually contributing to public safety, right? And we can't afford as a community to not have these types of assets working in the community.
Well, and let's talk a bit about what it is that, from all your perspectives, it has to change now. We change it from parole, and we'll talk a little about risk assessment and what that means, how that affects people's lives, and what that does. I mean, think about this from a perspective that we live in a culture and society that from the very beginning was about punishment. From the very beginning was about enslavement of Africans. From the very beginning was about genocide of Native people. From the very beginning was about owning and people not being able to be part of a society unless you own something. So we've been this an outgrowth of what we were at the beginning. Not all of our beginning was bad, but that part of it was bad, and it's affected us deeply. So what do we need to change? You talked about the parole system. How would we change it? And what are our ideas about what has to be pushed in the legislature to change these ideas, change the way we're doing things?
Well, as far as the parole system,
Stanley Mitchell.
as far as the parole system is concerned, it's obviously it's broken. Nobody in Maryland serving life sentence has been paroled in the past 28 years. So you can't tell me out of 2,000 men, not one of them is eligible to come out in the community. This risk assessment, I was given a risk assessment. The doctor that examined me, and his final report was that I would reoffend within 90 days, that based on my age, my race, and length of incarceration, what would I do to be released at that time when I took the risk assessment? I was 65. I'm going on my 7th year. And besides red light cameras, I haven't had any issues with law enforcement. So it's the system they use are just not right.
Salim?
To add to that, when I was going up for my parole hearings, I recall, I think it was something about you need 7 out of 10 commissioners to kind of like favor you before they were forwarded to the governor. And even after you got to the governor, you was hopeful that this got to be it. Because now they can see that I'm worthy of an opportunity. And when the governor says no, it's like 1 no against 7. And you were saying, wow, this is not even rational. You know, so what do? Do you go back and give up, or you fight the system? My thing was education. I felt that academics was the enlightenment that we needed. Just like now, I think with the more people knowing what's going on, sharing with a face to this, it's more visual now. and there's nothing hidden. I have to share this with you because back in the day, I mean like 70s, guys who got out of prison would kind of like hide. You know, they don't necessarily want nobody to know I'm out. Perhaps it's some way they was living, they didn't want to be exposed. But today, life is so, I guess, stressful for some people, there's nowhere to hide. You can't hide nowhere. Crime and violence is everywhere. In prison, out of prison, in private life, public life. I was in prison so long that I seen a grandfather, the father, and his son, 3 generations, in prison at the same time. I said, man, enough is enough. So that's when I started thinking that we need to attack recidivism. You know, that's my pet peeve, you know. I'm gonna make sure I help somebody not to go back to prison. You know, financially, academically, or just a grain of sand, I don't know. But I'm gonna be here and I'm in this race from now on. So the different attitudes we have now. So that's my whole objective, to make sure we're educating people, letting them know what both sides of it is. And I might say this also. You mentioned earlier about you could understand what people's issues about going to prison. And some people, for a long period of time, needed to be in prison. And then you get to that part, if you will, called forgiveness or redemption, or time is taking its toll. And then you have to see the other side of that. Where do we go from here?
So let's talk about where we go from here. Eddie, why don't you just pick up and then we go to Mark. I want to talk about how we change this, how do we change this?
Well, I'm going to be the fly in the ointment, right?
Go ahead.
The system's not broke. The parole system, the criminal justice system is working exactly like it was designed to work. That's right. It's incarcerating people that are no longer necessary, obsolete populations, poor people, black people, people of color, and poor white people. That's what it's been designed for. It was put in place, if you go through history, back in 1865, you had a surgence of prisons across America and across the southern states to incarcerate those people that had just recently won their freedom. It's still operating that way. There's something called institutional racism. It's in effect. Willie Horton just kind of gave them excuses and justification to not follow the law because the law was here. The law said all of us were eligible for parole. And they violated the law. Nobody went to jail. We did 32 additional years because they violated the law. Glenn Denny never went to jail. Nobody went to jail. It's working like they want it to work, and we can't reform it. We have to really, one, attack the concept that this is criminal justice. It's not criminal justice. It's rich people controlling property and the means of protection and protecting themselves against people that don't have anything. And people that don't have anything is pushing back, trying to get something. And in this case, in our community, we're pushing against each other to get whatever we can get to survive. So we need to look at the whole social economic arrangement before we can even talk about reforming criminal justice, because there is no criminal justice.
So as Eddie, I would say that's not the fly in the ointment, that's the analysis bursting out of the ointment. So, and that's good. So but in terms of the state of Maryland at the moment, on the very minimal level of parole and risk assessment, and that's a minimal level, given Eddie's analysis, and I think he's right. People's hearts and minds and legislators' minds and hearts have to be changed. So what is it that people like you and JP and others are saying has to be done, and what are you proposing?
So, you know, a couple things, but before sort of getting into the policy discussion, I'm really glad Eddie, you know, just sort of put it out there, because we have to have that conversation first, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that we learned as we were doing the research on the Ungers story, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that in Baltimore, when most of these folks were tried and convicted, there was something in Baltimore called the key man jury system. How many folks have heard of the key man jury system? We got some lawyers in the room too. I hadn't heard about it, right? So the key man jury system, which was in Baltimore right through the 70s and early 80s, the way we selected juries in the city at that time, and not just in Baltimore, all around the country, in fact, some places still do it to this day. The way juries were selected was the judge would identify a friend of the judge who would then select their friends to sit on the jury, right? Now, do we think any of those judges back then, not that many today, look like these guys or they look like me, right? And so what we had was a system, as Eddie said, that was literally designed and working, right, to incarcerate people of color, right? And you had all white judges, all white prosecutors, and pretty much all white juries who were chosen by the judges. That was not that long ago, right? So I think we have to actually have people understand that that's the foundation that we're having this discussion about, right? And really sort of embrace and figure out how we chip away in major ways at that. Because Eddie's absolutely right. It's working the way it was designed to work. Now there's a couple of things that we think we can do that should happen, like really quickly, to try to get at some of these issues that were identified through the Unger work, right? And an important thing, and Stanley did this for us, he went and talked to many of the Ungers. So the recommendations in the report comes from the Ungers and also from lifers who are on the inside who we talked to, right? So one is what we talked about, you got to get the politics out of this, right? So the governor should be removed from this. That can happen like that if the legislature would do it. And the people who are on the parole board should have to meet certain criteria. It shouldn't just be retired sheriffs and law enforcement, right? It should be people who have an understanding and can make informed decisions. So we should do that right away. The risk instrument is something really important because that's what's used to make decisions on people who are serving life sentences. We know the risk instrument is completely broken. The risk instruments that's being used said every one of the Ungers was high risk to reoffend. Right? And so now we know basically almost none of the Ungers reoffended. So there's either something wrong with the Ungers or there's something wrong with the risk instrument. My bet is it's the risk instrument that's broken. And then the last thing I would say, and you heard about some of this, like we know, and we've got folks here from the University of Maryland School of Social Work who really did a good job partnering with returning citizens to provide reentry supports for folks who have been away a long time, right? Who can use supports to come back and to do it in a humane way so that they can re-enter the community. That we should be doing that. We can do those three things, we would make some progress, but then we also have to have that conversation that Eddie talked about, right? Because it all happens in that context.
So I'm sorry, I'm here, this is what I do for a living, I have the mic down here. That's good, Mark. That's good. So but I don't want to always be on brass tacks, but just for a minute, just because, when you talk to people about why we should not incarcerate so many people. And we talk about people, there are other ways of dealing with justice and restorative justice and not just incarceration and putting people away. A lot of people hear that and don't hear it and don't want to hear it. And eyes and ears glaze over. They did the crime, they should go to jail. That's it, boom, end of story. So, but let's talk a bit about, so I think that's the mindset we have, and what has to change here is something really fundamental is how we do things. And part of it is, and we said this earlier when we were in my office, Mark, was that a lot of the literature comes out, talks about the money being saved, which is important for people like that to hear because that's the wavelength they operate on. On the other hand, that always pisses me off because it's not about the damn money, it's about the human beings' lives. But having said that, it is about money when it comes to how they're going to think when you want them to change something. Let's talk a bit about that. I mean, the amount of savings and talk about where that money could go. And I'm going to call on some folks in the audience here who can talk to us a little bit about where that money could go. But let's talk a bit about that. Anybody want to pick up on that first?
Well, I don't know.
Go ahead.
The money that they say that they spend on us, I really don't know where it goes because it got so bad that when I was in the penitentiary, they started making us pay $2 just to see a doctor. And if you didn't have the $2, if you worked, they garnished your pay. And if somebody from your family member sent you a few dollars, they would take it. The clothes, they were letting us, we made our own clothes. So I don't know where all this money is being spent.
in the prison system. I see these figures, but I don't know where. It's not spent on medical, and it's definitely not spent on so-called rehabilitation, because there is no such thing as rehabilitation unless you have 5 years or less. You can't even participate in no program. If you're a lifer, your best bet is to get a job and a decent cell buddy and just do what you got to do to get out. So I don't know where the funds are being spent. It's definitely not spent on education. If you have an 8th grade diploma or GED, then you're done. So I don't know where this money is going.
And the money that you are talking about actually left the prison system, when there was actually programs in prison for people to go to college and more, and they took that money out and took it away. That's something we forget about too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
They took when I first went to prison, you could have Pell Grants.
Right.
But and you had people in the community that would see us graduation on TV, and they would go to their legislators and say, "Wait a minute, I'm working 3 jobs, and I can't send my kid to college, and this guy is in prison, and he's getting a master's degree." So they stopped the Pell Grant. Same with the parole process. The parole process has always been flawed, but it was working a little bit. But then a tragic act happened by another individual, and as a result of that, they took parole from everybody. So it's like the pendulum has swung. You know, when somebody does something bad, everybody suffers.
Eddie, were you about to say something?
Well, where the money goes, Stanley just. It's interesting because the money goes to Cumberland, Maryland. The money goes to Hagerstown, Maryland. The money goes to Somerset, Maryland. And if you ever been in any of these prison systems, the one thing you'll notice is that 90% of the guard force is from those communities, a different culture, a different complexion, from me that is. 75% of the people in those prisons are from urban areas, Prince George's County, Baltimore, etc. The money goes to take care of Cumberland, Maryland. Cumberland, Maryland's industry is prison. Hagerstown, 30,000 people, their industry, their main industry is prison. Somerset, the same thing. And this is where that money goes. People are buying toilet paper for exorbitant rates. People are bringing milk in that the prisoners sometimes get and sometimes don't get. People are changing the light bulbs. The whole community is living off of those prison populations that you and I, well, me now, that we pay taxes for. That's where all that money, and so when they say that it takes $65,000 to keep a 60-year-old prisoner in jail, they're conning us, because you can keep a 60-year-old prisoner in jail for $5,000 because he's not going to go that far. And even if he gets out, he's going to try to come back in, unfortunately. You know, so it's a con game. That's what's happening. But they won't change that because those communities no longer have industry. The industry that went to China, Bangladesh, Mexico, etc., we replaced that. We're the industry. The prison industrial complex is a real thing in America, and it's to replace the manufacturing industry. And that's the reality, and that's where that money is going at. And I don't know, I mean, we can talk about it, and I agree with you. We need to take the governor out of the process. We need to control who goes in as parole commissioners. We need to do that kind of stuff because at least it would lessen the blow. But this system's not going to go away, and it's not going to be reformed in any kind of rational way until we start having the conversation on institutional racism and restorative justice.
So part of that conversation, and I want you all to participate in this conversation, please do. Part of that conversation, and I think one of the reasons we're having this conversation tonight, about the Ungers is what the Ungers teach us. The development of what we call the Ungers teaches us about what can be instead and what can replace it and how we replace it. That to me is the lesson. I mean, if there's a social societal lesson that's larger than any individual on the stage or any individual in this audience or any individual watching, is what does this say socially, politically, and economically about how we change the system and make it work for people instead of against people?
In general, I would think that the taxpayers' funds that's paying for our room and board and our food and clothing and shelter and the other things they mentioned is really at a minimum, because you can see how we dress and what we eat in prison. So surely $35,000 a head is not being spent on each individual in the prison. Much more $65,000 for an elderly person, and he's not getting that kind of medical attention anyway. So as he says, the money is revolving somewhere, and it definitely ain't up to us to decide how it's going to be spent, because we are in-house and we only got to cry now and then, which is why I often stress the part about education, information, because once it's known, then you'll look at it differently. But if you don't know, then you remain as you are. As he said, the surroundings, naval or counties or cities, they're benefiting from that. That's industry, that's business. But the reality is, we're talking about the human lives and the effect it has on people. Here's a man who's eligible for change, worthy, but he can't get a change because there's a price on his head. The more numbers, the more money. But like a farmer, I mean, you can't have your crop in the ground for so long before it gets ripe. Once it gets ripe, if you don't harvest it, it's going to get rotten. So they begin to spoil. And we're saying, hey, we got waste talent, waste energy, waste lives. And other people see that. So as an incentive, the younger guys, we got to set an example. We left some people behind that deserve their second chance. This big opportunity that's out here. And when I go with the opportunity, when I can, inside the institutions, I share that with them. I remind them that there's a way out of this madness. And don't get caught up. Don't become a part of the problem, even though you don't have what you want, which is mainly freedom out of prison. So it's something stronger than just the money and the prison itself. It's the mindset that we're destroying in the prisons. You know, because people, I mean, it's not that they will destroy each other eventually, but, you know, you no longer have hope. In my last 10 years, I've seen so much gloom. Sometimes you didn't even want to come out of your cell. And that's kind of sound like a contradiction for a man who wanted to get out of prison, but it was safer to stay in where I wouldn't have to face the gloom. I've seen strong men that were vibrant when I first went in, begin to just turn against themselves, you know, almost like gave up the fight. And I was saying, wow, we ain't free yet. Where's the giving up at? And even after you get free, you can't give up, because there's some other people that you connected to that you left behind. That's why we strive hard to get back. So the only thing I strive hard with the academic part is to let people see our humanity. We still got that. We didn't lose that. So we need to share it. And I'm sure if you bear me witness, here's some people that have been free all their lives, don't have humanity, out here today. And they could use some help. So I'm just saying, as he was saying earlier, it's a waste in prison. You know.
Were you about to say something, Stanley? Look like you were getting ready to put that mic up.
A lot of people don't realize that prison is big business. It's traded on the stock market. That in this country, the Constitution says, from what I was read recently and while I was incarcerated, that the only time they can get free labor for individuals is being convicted of a crime. And I'm gonna tell you a funny story, but it's really not funny. It's sad. When I was in prison, there was a guard, and I wanted to do something, and he told me, "Yeah, I'm gonna let you do it because I want you to be happy, because I want you to come back so I can send my kids to college." So that's the mentality that you have to deal with, and it's big business. So it's better for it's like when all of us were released. We were released with the help from our families, Elizabeth, Rebecca. In my particular case, they sent me a check for $18 after 37 years. So they set you up to fail. And as Salim said, but as Ungers, as a group, you know, we have a motto amongst ourselves that we're not going to contribute to that madness. We're going to show that if you let us out, we will do the right thing, that we bring more to the table than we took away from it in some cases.
So let's, Mark, you want to jump in here? I want to. Do you want to say something about this?
No, it's all right. Go.
Okay,
I'd rather listen to these guys.
So I want to hear what people are thinking, and what I want to talk about replacing what we have, and what that means. and replacing the money instead of for money being spent people inside, what does it mean to spend the money outside? And I want to start with what happens when people come out, because when people come out, we don't have any services available. Reentry is a joke when it comes to helping people find their way back to where we are. And I just want to talk about the reality of what we live in every day, and then talk about how to reform it in a serious way and change it. But let me talk to the two women you just called out, because because I interviewed you on my show. Marilyn, why don't you jump up here for a minute? Take that mic back there, and just talk a bit about what that is and the programs. Introduce yourself and talk about the programs that you ran for the men coming out under Unger, and what that took, and what that says in the larger scope of things about what we should be doing differently.
Sure. Basically, as we call it, the Unger Project was a very big team effort. It was the Office of the Public Defender who took the lead and started gathering information and trying to figure out exactly how many people in prison would actually fall under the Unger decision. We became involved as well. The University of Maryland Law School took on a number of the cases because there were so many that the public defender was kind of being pretty much thrown under with that. We really started with the very basics. When we got into the release planning, obviously the first and most important thing is a place to live. That's pretty basic, and pretty much everything flows from having a home base. We were actually really thrilled to realize how many people, despite all the years that they had spent in prison, how many people inside had really strong support systems outside. And that is really kind of the basis. If you have support in the community, you have a place to live, you can build from there. One of the things that we didn't even think about until we got into the whole process was the problem of identification and actually making people, quote unquote, real entities on paper in the real world. We had difficulty finding people's birth certificates. We had difficulty getting social security cards and numbers. We ran into all kinds of different things up against the Real ID Act that were not in place when folks went away. So it's amazing to see how little you can do without your identification. If you can't prove who you are in this society, just walking around, it's pretty much a non-starter. You can't apply for a job. It can hold you hostage. And these were a lot of just the very basic things that we were dealing with when people were coming home. We were fortunate in that when people came home, Obamacare had just come into effect in the Medicaid expansion, because having done social work for many years prior to that, it was a real struggle just trying to get people basic medical care. So we were fortunate enough that when people came out, they were able to access medical care. And it was very important with this particular group because they were older. A lot of people have the kind of chronic medical conditions that we all end up with when we get a little older. People had medications that they needed to take daily. We couldn't have somebody come out and just not take their medication or not access their medication. So a lot of the things that we were really doing were very base level sort of survival, try to get just the very basics for people to get them started. That's where we had to focus. We also had to try to support the families, because coming home is a big deal. A lot of people were going home to families that they hadn't lived with since they were young, or maybe hadn't lived with ever. I know at this point in my life, I love my sister very, very much. But if my sister had to come and live with me, that's not going to be so easy. So you're going to have a lot of, you're getting to know somebody all over again. And these are folks that that came out having not used an ATM card, having not are not being used to people sitting with their face in their phones all the time. I think a lot of people found that kind of upsetting, actually, and very rude.
Still
but
weird.
It is rude. It is. But really, I mean, the whole world changed, and these folks are walking out to a completely different world than the one that they left. And that's huge.
Yeah, but what you're describing is really critically important to understand. And let me come back here from what you're describing to the gentlemen on our panel here who are part of Unger to talk about what that was like for you all and what that says. Again, I keep want to bring this back to the larger question of what that means societally. What does it mean for men and women coming out, the services they don't have, what's needed? You know, because it was everybody here was a shock when you walked out there, right? It was just a shock.
Double shock. I mean, I was 18 when I went in, got out, I was like 62 and a half, and they didn't even have computers, and the phones and all this stuff was new, and I laugh at it now because I done grown up a little bit, but I remember Liz in particular, because Liz came to I was living with my brother, and I was happy to be home, but I still had that distance, so to speak. The major thing for me was being accepted. You know, most people didn't know who I was or where I came from. I spoke, they spoke, if they could get their head up, like you say, from the phone. And all that was new to me. But one thing that Liz made real significant was that not only was she there to help me with my socialization back into society, but she was helping my family. Because the family members always, you know, they glad you're home, and, you know, but you somebody else now. It's been 44 years, my man. You know, you somebody else. And some of them just growed up themselves and into whatever they're into. So I know in particular, and I share this story kind of humorously, even when I rode the bus for the first time. You know that long bus, that double bus? Felt like a caterpillar or something? I'm telling you. When I left, they was ching, ching, ching. They had to change the thing on the belt. I was on that bus my first time, and I heard a little voice say, turning at Saratoga Street. And it sounded like a woman's voice. But it was a man up the front when I got on the bus. And I'm trying to figure out, I know I ain't see no speakers in here or nothing. How could he do his voice like that? So I asked the young guys on the bus, the little kids, you know how wild they be in the back. He said, I said, did you see who said that? He said, no, that didn't come from him. So I thought he was playing with me. He said, no, it didn't come from him. He said, that's a satellite in the sky. He just blew my mind. I thought they was playing with me, right? But later on, I began to understand that, man, technology is rolling. And it didn't wait for me, and it don't wait for nobody else. There's some good parts to it and bad parts. But I was really shocked to see how much had changed. And I was sitting back here and I was just taking in stuff. Even now that I drive myself, I'd rather sit in the back of somebody else's car and just still take in the environment because I'm so appreciative of the opportunity. And I've been out like 5 years. I've been all the way to Saudi Arabia already, you know, with the opportunities, some support. So the biggest thing for me was having that support system and knowing that I was accepted, and now I have an opportunity to give back, you know, because I'm telling you, most of the riots that take place in prison, because it's always about being accepted and some type of, I want respect. That's all it was about. They ain't giving the chicken, Lord, chicken too small. They're disrespecting me. I remember one time, one guy made some wine out of a few oranges. The warden didn't know what to do. So he took all the oranges out of the prison. That's their reaction. For every little thing, one guy do one thing, everybody gonna suffer. A fight down here, everybody getting locked in. So it keeps the stress and the frustration level up high. You know, so now we turn it against each other. Man, y'all down there starting stuff, I can't come out, now I can't go and visit. It was always something. But having the opportunity out here in this real society, being the people that we are now, I mean, it's just full speed ahead, and there's a lot of work to be done. I'm just glad to be a part of it. You know.
So let's talk for a minute about what you know, as we push what the Ungers can teach Maryland about what has to be instead of what is, both in terms of how we deal with the penal system, how we deal with men and women who get in trouble, how we deal with men and women who are coming back in the street. I mean, what does it teach us? What does it teach us to say that this is how you have to change the system, this is what you can learn from what happened here, this is the way to do it? What would be the first thing you would say?
Well, it should teach society that we're human beings and we're not animals. A lot of people think that because you're incarcerated all them years, or because you're incarcerated, period, that something is seriously wrong with you, but you're just like everybody else that got caught up in a bad situation in a lot of cases. there's always going to be change. When I came home, I was fortunate that I had a wife and also had the team of Elizabeth and Rebecca that I could always talk to. But there's so many things that I could tell you that was a shock. I mean, going to the bathroom and the toilet flushed, and you're looking around and say, who pushed the button? I came down to see Elizabeth, and Maryland has a law that if you ever had a driver's license, you can get it back. All you had to do is take the test. So I had my license within a week. But I'd be driving down the street, and I see people next close to me, and they be having these animated conversations, and I look over and say, who are they talking? Were they crazy? Because I know I forgot all about the phone. So there's a lot of, it's a culture shock. But like I said, we are human beings, and we're trying to show, at the Ungers as a group, we're trying to show individual people that you can safely let people out that have served their time. And my biggest peeve is, I've been home 6 years. Every year, I'm fortunate enough with JPI, Sonia from the ACLU, to go down to Annapolis to testify against the so-called Lifers bill, to try to take the governor out the process. But my pet peeve is when I go down there is to see these people that are making these rules are so uninformed. That's number one. Number two is I don't care what the rules are. If the people that are applying the rules don't apply them fairly, it don't matter. Because if the rules were applied fairly, all of us I would have been home 22 years ago. Eddie probably would have been home 30 years ago. Salim would have probably been home 30-some years ago. So it doesn't matter what rules you have in place. If the people that are charged enforcing the rules don't enforce them fairly, it don't matter.
I wanted to just add one little thing. I think the lesson that the Unger decision had contributed to the state of Maryland is that I look at Salim, I look at hundreds of people, I see them, I move around, I see what they're doing. Almost every single person in that Unger decision that's been released has been out in the community doing positive work. Almost every single one. When I met them, they were all gangsters, and scared me to death. Now they are actually, I see them, Pennsylvania Avenue, I see them all over the city, and they are all doing positive work, trying to help make the community better. That's the lesson that the officials need to walk away with.
That's really important. I mean, if we could somehow pour that knowledge into the head of the state legislators, this is what the reality is, to make people see what the reality is, to have a change. I'm going to focus on it when we come back a little bit from back in the audience here to talk a bit about that in the time we have left. Go ahead, and anybody else want to get through it? Time is running out, so if you have something to say, there's the mic. But don't just say what you got to say.
All right. One of the things I want to say, having worked with you all, and I can't thank you enough for the compliments, is you all are extraordinary, but there are hundreds and thousands of extraordinary elders still incarcerated.
That's right.
And we have to level the playing field, because as great as our program was, and it was transformational for me as a social worker, you did the work. Your characters, your dignity, your integrity was the work. Teaching you that bus is bent in the middle, that was not a big deal. Dealing with those automatic flushing toilets, I'm with you with that. That's adjustment. You can teach adjustment. You can't teach integrity, dedication, and change. Redemption is where you came to us. You came to us in that state. And Unger is exceptional. You all have done exceptional things in the community, but that could be broadened. That could be broadened 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold with policy change. And that's what really has to happen. So I don't want to take credit for the amazing work you all did. I am honored to have worked alongside of you, and I hope it changes other states' minds as well, and it definitely has to change the state of Maryland.
No, I thank you for your work too, both of you. So, can we just talk for a minute about the kind of realpolitik that is being faced in places like Annapolis and what has to happen? So, what is it? Let's be very specific for a moment, just in terms of that immediate issue that's coming up this January, and the legislature opens. What it is that we want to see changed, and what you all are going to be fighting for in Annapolis to change. Mark, why don't you lead this off?
Sure. So, as we talked earlier, and we've been, working on this for many years, is to depoliticize the process. So one is to take the governor out. That should absolutely happen. But there should be other broader reforms, right? And so the folks who are serving these long sentences, there should be a process, a fast process, right? We've got over 3,000 people, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the tragedy. Like, these guys, they're exceptional and amazing, but they're not, because there's so many. We could go today, right, just down the road to Jessup and see guys just like this who just didn't have the same legal claim, right, who could be doing just as well, right? Not a, it's the opposite of a risk to community safety. They are providing and helping with community safety. So the state should immediately put in place a process to assess the more than 3,000 people who are of this age to see who can come back safely. And the great majority of them could, right? I would bet over 80% would be a no risk to return, and we'd save in the first year alone, right? We'd save a couple of $100 million, right? So the way that's going to happen is for folks like us and more folks to come down and make sure that people understand that in Annapolis. And then I think we need to force a discussion about what happens with those resources, right? They shouldn't just go into more law enforcement, right? They shouldn't go. They should be working to help communities where folks are from, who are ending up in our prisons. The last thing I'll say is, as we looked into this, doing the Unger research and doing some more research moving forward, the one thing that's striking, and you see it, Eddie's right, a lot of these folks who are out here doing the work, and a lot of the work they're doing are with young folks, roughly between the ages of 18 to 24, which is when most folks who are serving long prison sentences went in, right? So what we're doing right now is we're spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars incarcerating people who are older with no benefit. And the question is, how could we spend that money on folks? Because what I hear from folks is when they're working with the young guys, they say, that was me at that age. So I think the Ungers have an enormous amount to contribute because they are experts in transition and those things, but they're also experts in what did they need, what was missing when they were young, right? That could have made a difference then. Because nobody's saying it's going to be a win if folks are in prison till they're 50, right? We got to have a bigger conversation than that and figure out why are people even getting in these situations where they're ending up with these long sentences, right? And we can do a whole lot better by that. And these guys, they have the answers, right? So we gotta have the political will to push that conversation.
And we live in a world and society that thinks more about punishment than redemption.
That's right.
That had somehow to change in people's heads and hearts.
That's probably a whole nother show.
It is a whole other show. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Stephen Sandler. I'm from Coppin State University. I'm a graduate student in the criminal justice program over there. During my undergrad, I was fortunate enough to be in the social work department, and as a result, my internship was at the public defender's office under Joni Shreve, which many of you know is in charge, or was in charge at the time, of the Unger program over there with Laura James Towns. I had an opportunity to work with Rebecca and Liz on several occasions. And I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for transforming my personal life. Reentry was not my focus when I got involved in social work. Gerontology was. I was asked to participate in the Unger program at the Public Defender's Office. And what I found extremely interesting and frustrating at the same time was the amount of resources that was needed for the release plan and the barriers that I faced while you gentlemen were doing your thing there. I was doing my thing out here and was met with resistance. Housing was an issue, food was an issue, clothing was an issue, everything was an issue. And trying to find resources motivated me to the extent that if I was going to be in this particular setting, what would I want somebody doing for me to help me transform my life into something more than what it is. And so it was in that time frame of actually understanding what reentry actually meant. I had done a little internship down at a place called Voices for a Second Chance in Washington, D.C. And the number one thing that I saw down there in the D.C. Prison system was that birth certificates and IDs were very needed a lot of work, and there was a big disconnect. If you were from D.C., it was instantaneous. You went down to Morca, and you were able to get a slip that was able to you get your the voucher. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. You were able to get a voucher that helped you make that process easier. But if you were outside the system, it took 6 to 8 weeks before you even got a birth certificate. And if you're an individual who is under parole or probation, and the parole officer is saying, hey, I want you to go and get a job, but you have to wait 6 weeks before you can even get an ID, and everybody knows you need an ID to get a job interview, Social Security, no one's going to hire you.
Right.
So I was like, wow, there's this huge gap of time. You make it very difficult. And so my research that I continue to do in graduate school, and then I'm applying to Louisiana State University to get my master's in social work. This is the career that I want to focus on, and I want to thank you, gentlemen, for helping me with my personal transition from a landscape environmental kind of guy to a person that's very interested in helping you gentlemen transform your lives and welcome back to our society. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So, one of the facts you put out there and was put out earlier, I think is really important to think about when we talk about reentry. Because the reality is, as much as we want to change the system radically, and we have to fight to do that, and keep fighting that, is that prepare people to come outside. The stuff he mentioned, the stuff the two of you mentioned when you got up, why aren't those things done when people are inside, rather than when they come outside? I mean, that's one thing for people to understand. Preparing people to be able to return means preparing people to be able to return with the ID they need and whatever else they need. That's something that never gets talked about very much. It's all, people just have to come.
I thought I answered that when I said they prepare you to return back to prison.
Right, right.
So
right.
That's why these things are not done prior to release. It's to the advantage of people that work in that system and in different communities for you to come back. So there's no desire to really make you be able to succeed when you go out. I mean, like I said, most of us was let out with nothing. I mean, literally nothing. And so they expected us to return. So it goes back to what Eddie said, the system is working the way it's supposed to be. So that's why it's not done prior to you being released.
So can we imagine, as we think about what could be different, can we imagine when you talked, Mark Schindler, about the money, $200 million to keep people incarcerated over a certain age in the system a year, supposing that $200 million, and let's say, and I think the stat is right, but please correct me if I'm wrong, it's something around there, that 65% or more of the men and women in prison are from here.
That's correct.
In Baltimore. So supposing you took $150 million and invested it in Baltimore and the men and women coming out and in young people in communities so people wouldn't have to go in. If that was where we put that $150 million instead of keeping people inside. I mean, to think differently about to kind of push some different ideas, it's not so easy to do, but I mean, what are you thinking, Eddie? You have that look on your face. I know you too well.
It's a great idea, but in America right now, the way the arrangement is, it's a fantasy. There's money in incarcerating people, and there's certainly no money in helping people stay out in the street. Even as we're sitting here now, they're gentrifying our neighborhoods, and the housing stock is collapsing, and they're emptying those communities out. Where do you think those people are going? Some of them are going to the county, but a lot of them are going to the prison system. And that's the process. And so it's great, but maybe if we take over City Hall and the state government, we might be able to do something.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Part of the answer is a political movement. and we don't have a lot of time, so let me let you jump in and then back to the audience.
I kind of felt like I began to peep some of this ordeal that Eddie's sharing with us when I seen a lot of businesses that was investing in prisons, meaning it was profitable. So much so that they even had some businesses filing a suit against the Division of Correction for not keeping a certain amount of prisoners in the facility so that they could profit off of their being in there. Because they had a deal. It was a contract. It was business, right? Business as usual. So to think that they would want to flip that over just because we in there crying and complaining, you're supposed to be in there. That's what they look at that as. So when you get concerned about it, your tax dollars, they making money off it, then it's another issue. So like if it starts with us talking, discussion, merging together, then we can implement some policies. Some policies that somebody gonna act on, as Stanley said earlier, and you just have no change in the policies and the laws if they're gonna be fair across the board. So other than that, we're gonna keep on the same ordeal. You know, burn the candle at this end, put a little wax on that end, and look like we're making progress, but it's still burning and melting at the back. So the reality is, it's gonna start a slow process, but it's constant work, you know.
Stanley, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to trivialize it, but there's also victims. There's always victims when there's crime, and I don't want to trivialize anything about any victims. So it's a touchy subject. But whenever you talk about prisoners, then you talk about victims. When we go down to Annapolis and try to get the governor out the process, prior to our bill, there's a victim that comes in. That something real bad has happened to them. And so as a result, then our bill comes in. So it's the same way with society. I mean, a lot of the programs that we lost while we were in is because victims would see things on TV that we're getting privileges, and so it's like Eddie said. It's a big impossible task because you got to balance. There got to be some retribution. I believe that for society there has to be rules. If you violate the rules, there have to be consequences. Where we disagree is that the rules are not being applied fairly.
Thank you all for being you. I want to add a couple of observations and questions. So I think, to the point you just made, Stanley, I think one thing that systems are doing is forcing victims to believe that the only answer is retribution. And I think, I say that as somebody who also recognizes that I think what systems are doing are we actively, in the format of our criminal legal system, prevent the offender and the families and the victims or their survivors from communicating, including the families. And I think I see how that plays out throughout the entire criminal process, no matter how many decades out. And I think that that's a place that I hope as a society we're moving to change. I think another point that I don't want to get lost is how invisible the human rights violations are because of all of the secrecy surrounding the prison complex. And I think that that's something that, as community members, we've accepted too long as some inevitable way of how the prison system has to operate. The only way for institutions to be secure is to be secret. And I think it is vitally important. That is a threshold issue that if we don't start attacking that, and I mean attacking it, not just sort of poking away at it, we're not going to be able to get at these issues, because part of what happens is we don't even have the information we need to be able to say what is broken. And then related to that, I do really want to honor every family member or community support that has maintained a relationship with someone inside, because those are the folks who are doing reentry with you. And I think one of the brutalities of our current system of incarceration is how we brutalize family members who are just trying to be there for somebody. And I think that that is another area where we absolutely should be challenging prison officials constantly about all of the ways in which we are making it harder for families to be the support, making it harder for them to visit, making it harder for them to stay in touch. And we live in a modern era where there are plenty of ways we can be facilitating that if we really choose to. And so the last point I just want to make is not to forget about culture. I think we can change all of the rules we want, but the cultural values of what is the culture of our prison? We could make so many changes without spending any more money that would make our system more humane and more fair and better for victims. And we're choosing not to do that. And that's a choice that has nothing to do with what we're spending money on. So I thank you for illustrating how perfectly we're making the wrong choices right now.
Thank you. Those are good places to pick up for our next conversation. We do have to end, but if we can very quickly, gentlemen, quickly go down the line here with closing quick thoughts as we close out the evening. Why don't you start, Stanley?
As I said, I'm glad to be here, and it's a privilege. And I tell everybody when they ask me how I'm doing, I say that I'm alive and free, and that's all that's important right now. And I'm also trying to make sure that other individuals don't make the same choices that I made that land me in the position that I was.
Eddie?
Take over City Hall. That's one thing. And make resources available for these young people that are out here on the street corners that are trying to eat, pay rent, or even look good. Whatever the case, make some of those city resources, the taxes we pay, make it available for them, and we will stop them from getting into the prison system. I think that's important. So we need to think that we are in a position to take over City Hall. We just need to kind of figure out how to do it, and then direct that resources to stop guys from coming in and help Chili Willie and other people keep them out there. Oh, that's Chili Willie, right?
Just reminiscing, I kind of grew up in these kind of guys' shadows. Because I remember it was a class. I came in prison, I was young, 18, and it was a massive birdhouse, the Maryland Penitentiary. And it was as dark as it is in here right now. And it was one TV all the way up front. And everybody had to sit on these benches to watch TV. And if you wasn't a regular, as they call it, you didn't have no seat on the bench. So I'm only 18 years old. I didn't even have a mustache. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking to see if I see a face I know. I want to be a little supported. I see one or two guys I know, so I mosey over to them, and they ain't had no seat either. They stand inside the wall where asbestos and everything else is at. But the reality is, I remember some classes he invited me to called PE. They call them political education. He's a young guy. You can either get caught up in this jailhouse, or you can get your head together and work towards getting out of here. And he didn't even know me. I didn't know him then. But for him to actually drop that on me like that, though, I wanted to get out. I didn't know how I was going to get out, but he sounded like he said something worthwhile. And that's what turned me against that recidivism. That became my pet peeve. So these young guys out here in the street, I'm with a group called 410, Positive Impact. And we engage these guys, these young kids, because they ain't from the moon. They somebody's family member. They living up the street and around the corner. I'm talking the ones with the guns. So if don't nobody confront them and see what their needs are, it's going to be the same thing. And they don't think that they're actually losing because that's the lifestyle they accepted. They call it survival. So we engage them, we see them in the street, and we let them know what's happening. And when they see something, hear something we had to share about where you end up, one or the other, this, that, and the other, they contemplate that. But they got to trust you. They got to believe that you really care about them. They don't just pass through with your necktie on and waving and none of that. You have to tell them, there's a way out of this mess, man. And you keeping this going on, who's going to take care of your kids when you go to prison? Because when the young lady mentions what she said, when we went to prison, I affected my whole family. I devastated somebody else's family for the crime, but I also affected my own family. So now here's two families distorted. Can't get to see them, I can't get to see them, and the prison constantly cutting us off. No more visits. No more getting mail. Wasn't no such thing as a phone call. So you just an isolated individual trying to survive among a whole lot of group. It was 1,500 prisoners in there, all men. And guess what? Out of 1,500, guess how many of them was innocent? Everybody telling the same lie.
So, Mark?
Everybody was telling the same story. So, it was off to a bad start because we wasn't ready to face the truth about ourselves. That's why we struggled like we did. That's why we made up stories like we did. That's why people begin to label us like they did. But when you self-actualize and see there's another way out of this madness, and you shared, and he shared with me, and I shared with someone else, just pass it on the best you can. So that's where I'm at now in society, trying to pass it on,
Thank you, Slim. Mark?
So real quick, tough to follow these guys. First I want to thank you, Mark, but especially the three of you guys for being here, and Sharon, and for your families, and everyone who's here. I think it's such a critical conversation. I think, and maybe this is a topic for another conversation to build on, but I think something that Stanley and Sonia said is so important. We have to make sure that we have a real conversation about folks who are harmed by crime, right? And not the type of conversation that, as Stanley said, goes on down in Annapolis. Because typically what happens the last few years is we're debating this bill and making our case on the governor. They'll have another bill, and let's just be candid about it. The victim that is up there, that the prosecutor's office is putting up there, is a middle-class white woman from the suburbs, right? And that's the picture that they want to put forward. When the reality is, what we know, you're just saying, is disproportionately the people who are victims of crime are young black guys, right? These guys when you were younger, right? And so we have to be able to make sure that we push back on that myth, right? That myth that there's victims over here and perpetrators over here. Because everybody I've met and talked to who served a long sentence, they know exactly what it is to be victims of crime, because they're family members and them, right? Everyone. When we interviewed the Ungers, right, Stanley? Have you ever been a victim of crime? No, I haven't been a victim of crime. And then you get talking and say, well, that time that guy put his gun to my head, well, you were a victim of crime, right? And understanding that trauma and understanding what we have to do to respond. As Sonia said, we keep those people apart. We have to have real conversations about that. So I think that's something for further discussion. The last thing I'll just say is we have to be able to tell these stories and have this conversation and show that there's humanity here. I thought the film that the young people from Wide Angle did was fantastic.
Yes.
So I want to thank Tahir and his colleagues who just did an amazing job, and I know the relationship that they developed with the Ungers is really special. That's the type of stuff we should be doing. The ABLE Foundation should be thanked for supporting that work, Open Society Foundation, and for folks coming out here. I think this is the conversation we need to have, but then we need to all get on the road and go down to Annapolis and make sure that they hear what we're talking about.
Amen to that. And I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, coming here to the Real News Network. It was good to partner here with the Justice Policy Institute. I want to thank the crew for working so late and doing the work they did for us tonight and getting this message out to the world. And thank you all for being here, and let's keep the struggle going. Thank you.